Hello everyone, I'm Karen at the Cool Tools Studio, and today we're going to be making some statement earrings. We're going to be using Cool Tools stone setting punches to create lots of little settings that we're then going to assemble onto a handmade snake earring element. Today I'm working with a game-changing tool. These stone setting punches make it really easy to set stones of all different shapes, making these earrings a lot easier to create than you might assume. So let's get started by looking at what tools you need for the clay working portion of this project. For this project, you need a clay board, a pair of tweezers, a round cup extra firm clay shaper, an ultra clay pick, a brush for water, a brush for dusting, a pin vise with a drill bit, and the 2 yellow precision hole punches, a medium sanding stick, sanding pads, and some tough cards, a wonder roller, a clear work surface, a snake maker, and some clay thickness rolling frames, some fireable nano gems or CZs, and then the corresponding stone setting punches, EZ960 lump and syringe clay, a dish with some water, a hot plate, and some cool slip. I like to start this project off by setting some stones, and we're going to start off just like you do with the precision hole punch method for setting stones, where you're going to measure how deep your setting needs to be. So I've got my snake maker and some thickness frames, and I'm going to set my stone in the middle here and then move it side to side. You can see here that my stone is getting dragged around. That means my setting won't be deep enough, so I'm going to swap this out and go up to a 5 cards thick, and we're still moving. So we're going to bump up to 6, and we're no longer going anywhere. So I've now determined how thick my setting needs to be. So I'm going to set my stone off to the side, bring in my clay. I'm going to prep my snake maker with a little bit of cool slip so the clay doesn't stick to it. And we're going to press straight down. So then I'm going to be punching the outside of my setting. Generally, I use about 3 millimeters up. So for this one, it's a 7 millimeter for the height. I'm using a 10 millimeter punch, so I've got plenty of clearance. You can get away with 2 millimeter. It's a kind of tight setting. I wouldn't recommend it for a clay that has a lot of shrink, but I'm pushing straight down. And sometimes the clay comes up with it. You can always just blow it out when this happens. There's a hole in the back. And out it pops. And then again, I'm dipping in some cool slip in this back corner, and I'm punching the azure for my stone so light can come through, and I'm removing excess weight from my setting, punching that out. And then I'm going to position my stone. You can use tweezers for this, or your fingers, depends on what you're more comfortable with. And then we're pushing straight down to set our stone. So just like that, I've set an oval. I'm going to take it off to dry with some heat, and we're going to set a cushion. So same process for the cushion here, setting it down, determining how deep my setting needs to be, creating a clay patty, cutting outside. So this is just a really quick way to set stones, and I'm really excited about the fact that they come in all sorts of different shapes, because I think for a while there my work had been gravitating towards featuring round stones just because they were the easiest to set. So I'm really excited to start introducing more shapes to my work. So my clay is a little dry, so there's a little crack there, but once it's dry, it doesn't go all the way through or anything. It's just on this top. So I'm just going to fill that with some syringe when I'm cleaning up the setting. But there you go. Here's a set cushion too, and I'm going to keep setting some more stones. So I've set some more stones, and I'm going to take these off to dry completely, and I'm going to create some little kind of jump rings while those are drying. So these end up going on the back of my settings, and they're just a really quick and simple way to be able to kind of build chains with these settings. So I'm going to show you how I make these little rings. I've got a tough card here that I've got some cool slip earlier from my punches. I'm going to just apply it with my finger, and I'm just going to roll a little bit of clay to 2 cards thick for these little, I don't know if we'd call them jump rings maybe, but these little findings that my settings are going to hang from. I'm working with the 2 yellow punches, 3.5 and 2 millimeter here. And again, applying some cool slip. And I'm just trying to punch out, again, the exterior first. I just think it's a little bit easier. Whoops, sent that one flying. To center when you're starting off with the outside of your rings. So I rolled out plenty of clay here. There's way more than I'll need, but since sometimes it is kind of hard to center, I'm going to go ahead and make some extra circles. And I actually kind of like it when they do stay put. Makes it a little bit easier to just kind of punch and then peel away the excess. So now I've got my smaller punch, and I'm going to be punching the interior. And I'm trying to center it. It looks pretty good. But I'm not going to get too stressed out about it because, you know, if it's kind of off center, I can hang that part behind my setting and kind of conceal that. So once I've punched out the interior, I'm just going to have these perfect little loops that I can hang my set stones from. So I'm just going to keep on punching, and then I'm going to take these off to dry as well. So depending on how thick or thin you want the walls on your setting, or if maybe your stone's a little bit crooked, you might want to do some cleanup once they've dried. So I like to use a medium sanding stick for most of my shaping. So I'm going to just follow the edge of my shape here. I'm just kind of cleaning them up some. So I like using the sanding sticks to remove bulk of the material. I like these for straight up and down walls, I guess, because they, by making sure this is straight up and down and my stone is nice and level too, I know that the wall of my setting will also be nice and straight up and down. I'm going to kind of dust it away and see how we're looking here. That's a little thick for my taste, so I'm still going to remove a little bit more. And then my clay was a little bit dry when I was setting these, so there is some kind of superficial cracking going on that I'm going to correct. So I'm always kind of checking in and looking at, okay, where's this wall compared to this? Looks like this is kind of out sort of far. So just kind of using my stone as a guide to make sure I'm not sanding things crooked. So I'm just going to spend a little bit more time with this medium sanding stick, and then we're going to correct the cracking. So that looks pretty good. So like I said, there's a little bit of a crack there, and then just barely see there's a little bit of crack too. So at this point you have 2 options. You can dampen a brush, and you conveniently have some sanding here that you can kind of pick up and then lay in with the brush, or you could use syringe, whichever is more convenient for you. So I've just picked some up here. I'm just going to kind of lay it on. And I'm going to fill that crack and blend it out. Same with this over here. a little bit more. So then I would want to let this repair dry before I would use the sanding pads from superfine, ultrafine to microfine, just to get a really nice surface on this clay that once it's fired it'll shine up really, really nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and keep using the medium sanding stick, repairing cracks as needed, and then once the repairs have dried, using the superfine, ultrafine, and microfine to really clean up the surface on these. And then we're going to add the little jump rings. So I'm just wrapping up with cleaning up the clay that I added on those cracks there with my microfine sanding pad. And now we're ready to join our settings with our little jump rings. But first I'm going to clean up my work area here. I love these black tuff cards because they really show all of the dust here, and I'm going to save every bit of this to reconstitute for more clay. So I'm going to clean up the dust that kind of overshot my tuff card there, and I'm going to save every bit of this. Before we get started with joining jump rings to our settings, I wanted to quickly kind of talk about some planning. So I took my settings in the greenware state and arranged them and kind of figured out where they were going to be laying in the composition of these earrings because, as you can see here, the ones that go in the middle have 2 jump rings. So I wouldn't want to put 2 jump rings on every single one because then this one would have an extra jump ring hanging down on the bottom and nothing hanging from it. So for my ones that kind of end my earrings, I only put a jump ring on the top of them. So the ones that are either starting with a snake or in the middle would have a jump ring on the top and the bottom, but the ones that are at the conclusion of my earrings just have one on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and apply my jump rings to my settings. So I like to start them off by flipping them over and then dampening my brush and then just applying some water to generally where the jump rings are going to go. And then I'm going to take my jump rings and just apply just a dab of syringe. And then I use my tweezers to pick them up, take them over to my stone, and then I just kind of generally position them and place them, and then I'm going to flip them over for the final placement. For whatever reason, I feel like it's easier to see how things are looking and how they're lined up when you're looking at the more kind of refined side. So at this point, those are placed, but I'm going to flip my whole setting over while the syringe is still wet. This side I'm going to kind of pull it up just a smidge, scoot it that way. Bump this one this way a little bit. Maybe this guy needs to come down actually a little bit more. That looks pretty good. So I'm happy with that positioning. We're flipping back over, and I'm going to again use my damp brush, but this time to smooth out the excess syringe and kind of drag it along the edge here to reinforce that connection. So there's kind of a blob up here, but we're going to smooth it out. And reinforce the connection. So I'm going to keep adding little jump rings to all of my settings, and then we're going to make our snake. So now we're ready to make a coil to create our little snake elements. And I've started off with a drawing on tracing paper. The reason being that I'm going to put this acrylic sheet over it to kind of use as a guide when forming my snake. But when I have asymmetrical earrings, I kind of like to have, you know, the inside of the earrings that's going to be against the face the same. So I'm going to create one snake using this side, and then since it's tracing paper, I can just really easily flip it over and still see my design through to make the matching pair face the other direction. So before you get started, you want to have your drawing on hand, and we're going to be creating a coil and then kind of checking it with that drawing for length and kind of generally shaping, and just see how we do with this. So I've cleaned my snake maker and gotten rid of the cool slip, and I've cleaned up my work surface as well, because you actually don't want cool slip for this process. You need a little bit of drag when creating coils. I'm going to kind of start it with a log, and if you see me coil before, I usually use the rolling frames, kind of call them like my training wheels, but for this, since it's tapered on one end and it's kind of an organic form, I'm not shooting for it to be super consistent. So we're just kind of having some fun with this. And I'm just going to start out by initially just kind of create some length. I'm applying downward pressure while moving side to side. If you apply too much down pressure, you're going to kind of smush it. If you're not applying enough, it's not really going to go anywhere. And this does take some practice. This is one of the skills that I would say I'm still kind of working on. So I'm still stretching a little bit here, but I'm going to start tapering one end as I stretch. So I'm applying a little bit more pressure on this end here to kind of thin it out. And then I've got my snake maker, instead of flat, I'm kind of putting it at a little bit of an angle to create that taper. So down here, I'm kind of thinning things out. You can also come closer to that edge and try to thin it out a little bit. And then I'm going to go back up here and start stretching for length again. And this is up to you if you want like a really kind of chunky snake. You might want to use a little more clay. For this one, I'm going for kind of a thinner snake. Once I've made one, what I do to kind of make sure they're going to be of a similar thickness is I will weigh that snake and see how much it weighed, and then I start with the same weight for the ball of clay for the next coil. It's really hard to make them consistent otherwise. So I'm thinking this might be about long enough, so we're gonna take our drawing here and we're gonna kind of test it out. Oh, now that it's over here, I'm thinking it might actually be a little short, but we'll see how we do. Maybe I'll surprise myself. And I'm kind of working with this end here. I'm going to kind of coax it in a little bit. My brush is kind of damp. And again, this is my guide. It's kind of thicker in some spots, thinner than the other. I'm just using this to help me form it. It's not, you know, set in stone. It's not the rule. This is meant to be a fun project. And I'm going to let it evolve as I work. Coming around this way. And then, all right. I would have liked to have a little more clay for the head. Usually what I'll do is I'll take the coil and I'll kind of bend it and fold it around. And I'll show you that on the next snake, but for this one, he's just gonna get an entire new head from fresh clay. So I'll show both ways of working there. I'm going to really quickly kind of dampen these points of connection and do a little bit more kind of shaping before things start drying too much on me. Kind of slid off my drawing there. Come back a little bit. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a crack there, but I'm going to end up filling that with syringe. But let's form that snake head. So I'm just grabbing a little bit of fresh clay. And then in general, I kind of make my snakes have kind of a pointed face and then a little bit kind of blunt out their noses and then kind of pinch back again And I'm just kind of establishing general shape here. I'm going to use the clay shaper and then further refine the shape with sanding as well. But for now I'm just kind of shooting for a general, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. General snake head. So at this point there's kind of an overlap there, and that's going to help my connection be strong. So instead of just chopping it, I'm going to do is I'm going to take my clay shaper and we're going to flatten that out some. And that way it kind of bridges this connection from body to head here, so we don't have an unfortunate incident where our head falls off. So I applied some more water to my snake head and kind of flattened that out too. And we're gonna make these two be friends. So we got a little distorted in this, but that's okay. We're gonna refine the shape here with this clay shaper. So I'm kind of bringing back and kind of flattening that edge there, squaring up the nose just a little bit. And like I said, you can also, if you work better in a reductive way, you can spend some time manipulating the shape by sanding it as well, filing it, whichever way of working works best for you, really. So I'm kind of smoothing this out, and I think we're looking pretty good. Square it out a little bit more. I like this cup shaped burr because, or not burr, rather, this cup shaped clay shaper, because it's got this kind of flat face that you can just use for kind of flattening out edges. And we're going to kind of bring back that angle on this side of the face a little bit. And then at this point, if you want to kind of add eyes or additional detail like nostrils, totally good. I just kind of wanted a sleek snake form here, so I'm not going to add that detail, but you know, you've got plenty of creative license with this project. And then at this point, there's a little bit of crack here that's got a little dry on me. It dried faster than the rest of the snake because it was really thin. It's no problem. I'm just going to put some syringe there and blend it in. And then at this point, I'm also going to come to any kind of points of contact and connection and add a little bit of syringe there just to make this kind of one piece. Make this a nice strong form. So I've laid it in, damp brush. I'm going to kind of push down into those low areas and smooth out. So at this point I've got the general shape of my snake. I'm feeling pretty good with it, so I'm going to allow this to dry, and I'm going to try to make another snake really quickly to show you how you can go about folding the head out of the end of the coil if you do make it long enough. So I managed to have some excess on this one, so I can just kind of show you what I mean when I said I would just kind of fold the excess over and then kind of bring it in, and then take a clay pick and kind of cut a little bit of an angle. And then I'm just going to pinch at the front a little bit to start that snake shape, or snake head shape, I guess, rather. And then push back there. I'm going to add some water. And then for this one, I do a lot of building with syringe, because obviously there's a kind of gap or a valley here in the middle. So I'm kind of coming in through there and then up on the sides just a little bit. And then I'm going to kind of come hit this angle a little bit too. And I just love working with syringe in this way. It can get very sculptural. You can build a lot with syringe. I think we're used to kind of using it for filling gaps, but I've had some pieces that I've done a lot of work with syringe. And you just kind of smooth it out with your damp brush. I'm just going to keep working with this until I'm happy with the shape of the face by either smoothing or adding more syringe. So I'm pretty happy with the shape of the face here, and then I also went ahead and added some syringe at my points of connection yet again. So this is dried some, and I'm going to start off with my superfine sanding pad to kind of clean up some syringe there, and then do a little bit of refining of the shape. I'm pretty happy with how it looks, but we're just going to do some cleanup. There was excess syringe. And if you've seen any of my videos before, you know that I usually go all the way down to microfine. But for this video, I'm actually kind of mixing it up a little bit. And I didn't want the snakes to have like a super high finish to them. So I actually only finished up to superfine because I wanted them to actually have like a little bit of texture. I wasn't feeling like sculpting scales or anything like that, but I just wanted them to have not quite the high shine look that the stone settings had. So I only finished to superfine because I know that I was going to come in once they're fired and hit them with a 120 grit radial disc. So there's no sense in getting these up to a super high finish only to remove it. All right, so we're just about there. Before these go in the kiln, we need to add the little jump ring that our stones are going to be hanging from. On this end, it's just going to hang from the loop on the tail, so make sure that part of your snake isn't too thick. You could always file it or use a larger jump ring after it's fired if you're having an issue there. But we're going to apply the jump ring, and we're going to drill a little bit of a hole to give us a place to solder our earring post into. So at this point, snake's flipping over, and just like before, I've got one of my little jump rings here. I've got some syringe. I'm going to dampen this end here. Put just a little bit of syringe on this ring. Pick it up. Position it on the end here. And then just like with the settings, I feel like I just do a better job lining things up when I'm looking at it from the front. So I'm going to kind of pretend, all right, it's hanging from up here. Does that look like it's nice and straight? And it does. So now we're flipping back over, and we're just going to really quickly with a damp brush again, smooth out any excess syringe. And we're good to go there. And now we're going to be drilling a hole, and this is just giving us a little bit of a notch for our earring post to kind of lock into when we're soldering. So for the mass of my earring, by the time it's got all the hanging elements and everything on it, this is kind of going to be the center. So kind of in the middle of my loop here, I usually kind of make a little point and then pull away and check. And then I'm just twisting. And then as a note for determining which drill bit to use, I just took the drill bit and kind of butted it up against the end of my earring post and picked one that was a little bit larger because it is going to shrink. All right. So you want to assure that both your snake and all of your setting elements and all the connections are completely dry before you fire. And since I'm working with EZ960, I'm going to fire them on an open shelf at 1675 for 2 hours. Here's what we need to wrap up this project. I have an annealing pan with some pumice in it, some sterling silver earring posts, cross-lock tweezers, regular tweezers, And then some solder. Cool Tools sells solder that's been pre-cut into little chips, and it's super convenient to work with, and that's what I'm using today. You also need some flux. This flux has a brush in the cap, so we don't need a flux brush today. I have a butane torch, some chain nose pliers, some sterling silver jump rings, and then these are 120 grit radial bristle discs that have been mounted on a mandrel. If you don't have a flexible shaft, you could always use just sandpaper instead. This is what I use to get the final finish on my snakes. And then last but not least, I have a fume extractor. When you're soldering, you want to make sure that you're working in a very well ventilated area. So at this point, I've got my snake, and usually when I'm soldering, I solder on a soldering board, but since the snake has a rounded face on this side, it's actually a little more stable to just work directly in the pumice and kind of nestle it down. So it's going to stay nice and put this way. So I've got my handy flux here, and it super conveniently has a brush in the lid, and that's just really helpful for keeping it fresh and closing it up. So I'm just brushing it where I'm going to be applying my solder. And then I'm also going to just apply some to my earring post here as well. So I'm going to be doing some chip soldering today, and what I like to do is I like to preheat the flux till it runs clear, and then it's going to have a little bit of stick. That way when I position my chip solder, it's not going to run off on me. So I'm wearing some safety glasses, my hair is tied up, I'm not wearing any loose clothing, and I'm ready to solder. So at this point, I'm pushing up the lock safety function on my torch, and then this dial here adjusts the amount of butane and the power of your torch. So I'm dialing that up, and then pushing this back button to ignite. So now at this point I'm coming in where my flux has been applied, and I'm looking for it to run clear. So it's kind of done bubbling, it's looking clear. Turning off my torch, and I'm going to grab a chip of solder. Placing that right on that hole there. So then at this point, I'm going to kind of charge the snake with the solder. So that means I'm going to melt the solder to the snake, and then I'm going to position my earring post and then try to get the solder to jump or join those two pieces. So at this point, I'm heating this area again and just looking for that solder to flash and flow. Looks like it's getting close. The snake is a rather large element. All of this is kind of drawing heat away from the solder here, so it is going to take a little bit to gain enough heat for the solder to flow. You can see how my solder is kind of balling up. That means that the solder is flowing, but my piece isn't hot enough to receive it. So I'm going to spend some time focusing heat down here. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but again, you need this whole piece to hit soldering temp in order for that solder to flow, because it's just going to pull heat down to the cooler part. So there we go. See how that melted out onto the piece itself? That's what we're looking for. So at this point, I'm going to make sure this isn't hot. It was kind of sitting close to what I was heating. We're good to go. I'm going to position my earring post in my third hand. You can just use tweezers and position this and just bring it in while you're torching, but this is a much more controlled, beginner-friendly way of going about this, is to position it in the third hand. And you want there to be some pressure behind this third hand, and to be really pushing the post and not just kind of resting on top of the piece, but actually kind of pushing it down. So you want to spend your time here, because making sure things are really well positioned is going to make this process of soldering go smoothly. There we go. So that looks pretty good. So at this point, I'm going to relight my torch, and I've preheated this snake. It's cooled down some while I've been doing this positioning, but because it is both larger and has been preheated, I'm going to be focusing my heat a little bit on the post to try to draw that solder up. But I'm still going to heat the snake some too, because again, it is substantially larger than that teeny tiny earring post. So I'm coming up and heating that post, and then heating the snake. And I'm just trying to look for that solder to flash and hopefully pull up to my post. So at this point, I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on the back of the third hand up by where it's connected to the annealing pan. And that's again just applying a little bit of pressure to make sure this earring post isn't just resting on the snake. Alright, so there was my flash. So the quickest and easiest way to make sure your piece soldered is to try picking it up by the earring post and see if the snake comes with it. And it looks like that did. We are good to go. So this piece looks pretty good, so I'm just going to quench it, but if you do get some fire scale or a bunch of buildup of flux, you can always pickle your piece as well. So I'm going to quench it, and we're going to keep on moving. So again, this is entirely up to you, what kind of finish you want to apply to your snake element of your earrings here, but I wanted them to be kind of satiny, a little bit rough, not the usual kind of high finish that I do. So I've got some, they're kind of worn, they're used 120 grit radial bristle discs here, and I'm just going to run that over the surface of my piece to kind of achieve a finish here. These are great because you can kind of angle them and get them in between areas here. But I just really like the kind of soft, textured finish you get with this. And again, if you don't have a flexible shaft machine, you could be applying some texture with some sandpaper or some polishing paper. Lots of different ways that you can finish up these pieces. I'm just kind of bouncing it here at different angles to kind of give it a little bit more dynamic finish, a little bit more direction. And I'm really happy with the way that looks. So now we're ready to finally bring it all together and join the settings that I've made with these main earring elements here. So I usually kind of lay them out generally how they're going to go. And I've got my chain nose pliers here, my open jump rings, I'm going to start off by placing the jump ring with the break facing up. And then when you open jump rings, you don't stretch them open and distort the loop shape, you open them side to side, and that keeps them a perfect circle. And I'm going to go through one, starting at the bottom there, and then join it to my other setting. And you kind of wiggle back and forth a little bit to make sure you get a nice tight closure. And then I'm going to join those two to the top green. just like before, going through, adding this one on top, and closing. And then one more jump ring to join it to my snake. We're opening up through the green, through the tail, and close. I'm going to add these two elements just like I did those, and we're going to have ourselves a lovely earring. So here are my finished earrings. I'm really happy with how they turned out, and I can't get over how easy it was to set all those stones using the stone setting punches. I know I've said it before, but as I keep making, learning, and getting my hands on new tools, I keep creating a new favorite. So for now, these are my new favorite pair of earrings. I hope this video inspires you to create a new favorite pair too. Thanks for watching.